I was out with a friend not too long ago who was a scientist or engineer, and the friend was asking me, my head just spinning. There's so much about energy and the energy transition, and what is the transition, and energy security. I don't know what that is. That's what my friend said. And then there's the cost of energy, gasoline price, I guess, and now there's something else new coming up, this minerals business. What are minerals? And then the friend said, we've got 5 minutes left. Could you tell me all about this in 5 minutes? So I got to thinking, said, well, how do I answer that? I couldn't tell him much about it in 5 hours, let alone 5 minutes. But there really is every newspaper article, every newscast, I mean, literally every newscast has something about energy these days or related. And so you might ask, why is there so much concern about energy? What's the fuss about energy? Well, first, this curve shows that energy is not only required for life, but it's also required for prosperity. Now, this is a plot. You don't have to remember all the numbers, just the trend, but it's for about 50 years from 65 to 2015. I could have gotten more recent data. I just use this curve. But it shows on the vertical axis the world's gross domestic product, a proxy for prosperity. And that's on the vertical axis. And on the horizontal axis is the amount of energy it took for those years to, in fact, produce that amount of gross domestic product.
Sorry, Sid.
Am I being cut off already?
Yes, that's it. That's it, I'm afraid.
I was giving a lecture at SC a couple of years ago, and it was, I was talking, it was supposed to be 20 minutes, and I hadn't talked more than about 8 or 9 minutes because I was timing it. And suddenly they got up and said, thank you, Sid, we're about finished now. Let me go back to this anyway. This is the first thing, is that when you look at that curve, look how it's linear. The more GDP, the more energy you require. Now, the president of Uganda spoke, I think about a year ago now, if I recall, at the United Nations, and he was very blunt. He said that I will not restrict my citizens' prosperity for the sake of the Western countries' climate goals. He was very blunt. He understood very well how energy affected his climate, his prosperity, and his people. In his case, he was more worried about feeding them, clothing, medical care, much more than other things, if you will. So that's one thing, is that energy is not required for life, but for prosperity. Now, the second, okay. Now, don't forget this slide. We spent enough time on it. You should know all about that one. Okay. The second thing, why energy is so important, is shown here. Now, this curve shows, again, something about energy. The axis on the left refers to the blue curve, and that's what's called carbon dioxide emission intensity. That is, it's how much carbon dioxide is emitted per unit of world GDP. And what it shows over whatever that is, 65 years or so, the efficiency for using energy has gotten much better. Look how the blue curve has gone down. And so we produce more GDP with less carbon dioxide emissions. That's very good. But the curve, the brown curve, which is the axis on the right, is the problem. That is the amount of carbon dioxide emitted annually. And it's in billions, 10 to the 9th tons annually. And even though the world's gotten more efficient for using energy, and it continues to, the GDP is growing so fast worldwide that it swamps the efficiency improvement, and we see how much growth. Now the world, there was blips up there during the pandemic, but you see now the world carbon dioxide emission is back on track again to pre-pandemic levels, if you will. And we're looking at about 36 billion tons a year of carbon dioxide gas emitted. That's a lot, really a lot. So that's the problem. Now, these two things are competing in a way: world prosperity and the emission of carbon dioxide, which leads to global warming. So they're competing. And not everyone in the world has the same interest or the same priorities on those two things. And that's turning out to be a problem, not only worldwide, but in the country, and not only in the country, but amongst our own citizens here in the country, as to these two competing things of prosperity versus carbon dioxide emissions. Okay, let me give you a few numbers, and you don't have to remember all the numbers, because you can have my slides, you can go to the internet and find these easily, but just the trends. Now, these are not projections. These are facts. These are not estimating of facts or projections of what might happen. This is the U.S. electricity, now U.S. only, electricity only, produced over what, 50, 70 some years, over 70 years now. On the left is total electricity in the U.S., and you see the bottom brown curve is coal. And we see coal peaked out in the early 20s, and then coal electricity produced from coal, decreased a lot. That's the brown curve on the left. The blue is natural gas. Natural gas has really filled in for coal. We know that. That's helped to slow our emissions growth, helped to reduce U.S. emissions. So the blue is natural gas. The red is nuclear. Nuclear is kind of been constant for a number of years, last couple of decades, about constant. Nuclear electricity may decrease so if the U.S. keeps shutting down nuclear plants. So nuclear, and then the green is all the other. Now the green is shown in more detail on the graph on the right. It's what you might call renewables or the other energy, which includes renewables. And you see the green curve now is expanded on the right. And the blue in that expanded one is hydro. Well, we know because of Lake Powell, Lake Mead, the Colorado River basin is really suffering now from insufficient water, insufficient snowpack. So hydro may go down. Hydro's been about flat, that's the blue. Then you see geothermals on there. Let's see, next, the big one that is shown on there is green. And green is wind. So wind electricity has really grown. Blue is hydroelectric, and green is wind. And then solar is a little yellow at the top. It hardly shows up, although it is growing now. But now these are facts. This isn't any estimate. This is a fact that we're getting about 40% of all U.S. electricity today comes from natural gas. Natural gas is abundant primarily because of fracking. So about 40% of our electricity is natural gas, about 20% from coal, 20% from nuclear, and the rest is all the other things, including hydro, and wind is showing up. So the big changes in the last few years has been reduce coal, increase natural gas, and increase wind electricity. Here's another fact. This came from J.P. Morgan's annual interview outlook, which I think is well respected. I happen to use 2020 because the pandemic has created some wiggles in the curve and changed. We're back to pre-pandemic paths again now. But this breaks the energy consumption, world energy consumption, into industrial, transport, and residential, commercial. And you don't have to remember all the numbers on that, but there are a couple of important things. I think electricity worldwide is not very big. If you reduce emissions from electricity, you're only working on 17% of the current carbon dioxide emissions. Now, the intent is, we hope that we can electrify more things and raise the electricity and then move electricity to more of the lower carbon emissions production. Electricity is a small part today. Fossil fuels produce most of the electricity worldwide, really most. In China, about 60% of their electricity today is coming from coal. India is about the same. And so the third thing is the industrial sector is by far the biggest. And when you look at the 5 biggies for polluting worldwide, 5 biggies, cement production is very emissions high. Steel, copper, and aluminum together. Ammonia for fertilizer. If you don't have ammonia, the world will starve to death. We have to have ammonia for fertilizer, plastics, and then manufacturing. Those are the 5 biggies. Now, people know this. This is not anything that's hard to find. You can go on the internet and find all sorts of things. This is fact. Okay, a little bit more fact, and again, you don't have to remember all these numbers, just kind of the trend, but this is some information regarding our fossil fuel that we burn annually. Oil, you hear a lot about 100 million barrels a day. We hear a lot about that. You know, the world oil consumption is close to 100 million barrels a day. Now, a barrel is 42 gallons. The gas tank in your car may be 16 to 20 gallon tank, something like that. A barrel, so it's less than a half barrel of oil. And we're using more like 100 million barrels a day, every day, including Sunday. We're using a lot of natural gas. In fact, natural gas is so embraced that demand is exceeding supply today all over the world. Our natural gas has gone up, almost tripled in price in the US, and it's more than 10-fold increase in Europe. Natural gas, instead of being in gallons, we often rate natural gas in terms of cubic feet. Cubic feet of natural gas have standard condition. And if I have a cubic foot volume and I just fill it at room temperature and room pressure, it then holds what's called a cubic foot of natural gas. Well, the world's using about 300 billion. That's what the B stands for. 300 billion standard cubic feet of natural gas every day. Every day. A gas well, say in Appalachia, I don't know, John knows better than I do, after 6 months might be producing what, 50,000 a day or something, 70,000 a day, 70,000 a day, standard cubic feet. We're using 300 billion every day. Coal is the one that surprised me. I knew it was a lot of coal, but I really hadn't thought much about it. The world uses about 24 million tons of coal. Now, your car weighs about, what, 1.5 to 2 tons for your car? 1.5 to 2 tons for your car. The world's using 24 million tons every day. Those are facts. The cost, just for reference, see how much do each of them cost in terms of their BTU. And the BTU isn't the only criteria by any means, but just to compare, if you look at oil at $100 a barrel, it's quite a bit less than that today. Right now, it's in the 78 or something, or 80 range, I think. But at 100 a barrel, oil is about 2.4 cents per thousand of those BTUs. BTUs are pretty simple. You can categorize energy as BTUs, or it could be joules, or it could be watt hours. BTUs is, as you probably know, is the amount of energy it takes to raise 1 pound of water 1 Fahrenheit degree. So if you look at 1,000 BTUs, oil is about 2.4 cents. Natural gas is about 7.1 cents. So it's high at $7. It's right at $7 today, I know. For 1,000 BTUs, and coal is about 2.9 cents for 1,000. If it's at $130, say, per ton, short ton for coal. Anyway, those are. But here's the big one then to remember too. That's what all we use. It's at 36 billion pounds of carbon dioxide. So that's a lot, I think. A lot of carbon dioxide. Okay, let me talk a little bit about our energy sources then. We have primary and secondary sources. You know, not all energies are primary sources, if you will, but let me just clarify that. Solar, wind, of course, oil, gas, and coal, they're all primary energy sources. And don't forget, they're all as free as is solar or wind. People say, well, solar is free. Of course it is. So is oil. So is coal. If you own your property, you have mineral rights, the coal in your property is free. So this is how you get it out. That's the catch. But coal, oil, and gas are just as free as the solar and wind. They're all free. It's a matter of how you can recover, use, and so forth. Solar, wind, and geothermal are primary energy sources. Direct electricity costs for the solar, photovoltaic, and wind electricity have really reduced in the last 2 decades. You know, they really have come down drastically, not just due to scale-ups, but due to inventions too. Solar, photovoltaic, and wind turbines really do work. They produce electricity. But you see, I said direct electricity. Now that's one you must keep in mind, because direct electricity, where we say, well, solar is low cost. Well, not quite. Direct costs don't include the electric lines you're going to have to use to wheel the electricity, or the construction of the solar panels. But the big one, the big issue on these wind and solar, is its intermittent nature. What do you do when the sun doesn't shine? That's a cost that if you put in there, hard to calculate, because there isn't any way of storing the energy. There is no way of storing huge amounts of energy long term. So we don't know what the costs are, but there is some cost there. So be careful when you hear, well, solar's like people. Well, kind of. Wind grid electricity has made really a great impact today. You saw on the curve I showed how wind shows up on the charts for electricity. Solar is not showing up much yet. Particularly offshore wind. Offshore wind is spectacular. You probably know that the GE10 turbines, I think the turbine blade is 350 feet, single blade, more than a football field for a single blade. They're huge. They really do. Wind blows and they produce electricity. So wind is making a bigger impact than solar. But the problem is this long-term, large-scale storage that is required. You know, we'd like to store for solar and even wind too, summer to winter. They change. And so, well, there is storage being added some now with lithium-ion batteries. And when I say some, I mean, it's hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know if you noticed last week, there was a big fire in California. It was, I think, a $289 million Tesla solar, Tesla battery pack caught on fire. So it's big, but the amount of energy they store is very small. The other thing that I find frustrating is that energy is in, like I told you, BTUs or watt hours or joules. It's not in watts. People say, well, it's a battery pack for a 100 megawatt battery pack. Wait, that's not energy, that's capacity. And so how long can you provide that 100 megawatts? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? And you don't see that in the media. I find it hard to believe the media is that uninformed. They don't tell you what the energy is of these batteries. They don't tell you on the cost either, how often you're recycling. The cost of these batteries are an upfront capital cost, primarily. Not much maintenance on them generally, unless they catch on fire. But if you cycle your lithium battery pack once every year, you're not going to be delivering very many watt hours. On the other hand, if you cycle them every day, the same capital cost allows you to deliver a lot of watt hours. Well, that's not explained either to people. So how do you figure this cost based on watt hours? So anyway, large scale long term isn't on the horizon, I don't think. Although we do have, even here at the University of Utah, some people working on the flow batteries. Very good. Cal is very good. He's working on flow batteries. But when you look at the scale, it gets pretty big. I think I did a scale even on with his numbers, and you still get up like 1 million gallons or so of electrolyte per megawatt hour. I mean, that's a lot. You can have big tanks. So anyway, solar wind, keep in mind, there are complications. Hydrogen. Boy, do we hear a lot about hydrogen. I didn't know much about this either as I looked into it. I didn't realize that the world already produces over 90 million tons a year of hydrogen. And that's a lot. Hydrogen is pretty light. So the world's already producing over 90 million tons. Now, it is a secondary energy source. Hydrogen is not primary. It has to be produced. Hydrogen doesn't grow on trees. It has to be produced somewhere. And of course, the idea is we'd like to, if we could produce it with solar or wind or hydro, something renewable. That would be great if we could. But right now, the 90 million tons are produced mostly from natural gas, virtually all from natural gas and coal. And it's used for refining, or it's essential, and it's used for making ammonia. So hydrogen is already, I argue, a fairly significant big industry worldwide. Large-scale electrolyzers, which will allow you to do convert electricity decompose or dissociate water into hydrogen and oxygen. It's kind of the things you did in your high school science class, where you produced the bubbles, and it was bubbles of oxygen and hydrogen coming up. They're being produced in large scale now, and that's good. There'll be a scale-up cost reduction for the electrolyzers to produce hydrogen for electricity. Good. But hydrogen, although density-wise, based on weight, is pretty good. It's not too bad based on weight. But density, energy density based on volume is terrible. That's a problem. Hydrogen only has about 325 of these BTUs, British thermal units, for each standard cubic foot of hydrogen. That's really low. Methane's 3 times that. So therefore, you typically have to pressurize it or liquefy it to get the energy density by volume up to some workable level. I have a friend that has the new hydrogen car. It's a Honda car in California. I think there's about 40 of them in California and Nevada that are kind of research cars, or hydrogen cars. He likes it. I talked to him about it, and it seems very nice, very comfortable. It uses hydrogen, but in order to have enough hydrogen for about a 300-mile travel, he has a tank that's about 31 or 32 gallons, size of your water heater. So he has a water heater sized tank sitting behind the back seat with 10,000 psi hydrogen. I can't imagine that that's going to fly in the U.S., at least not for a long time. And I asked him if he has 2 sons, teenage sons, and he said, "Do you mind if they sit in the back seat?" Well, no. Anyway, but then when you compare hydrogen, if you look compared to gasoline, now gasoline, we usually think of it in gallons because your tank holds 16. Well, a gallon of gasoline is 118,000 of these British thermal units per gallon. That's the bottom of that. 118. Well, hydrogen at 10,000 psi, the pressure of this Honda hydrogen car is about a quarter of that, about 32,000 BTUs. And so, but if you do pressurize it or liquefy, you do get the density by volume up pretty good, but nothing competes with gasoline. That's the competition. Look at 118,000 BTUs for each gallon of gasoline. Hydrogen as a burning fuel, and is given to make hydrogen, and then use it to burn like in an internal combustion engine or a jet engine. It looks to me like the numbers are awfully tough to make them work. I don't know, maybe they'll work, and there are people investing in airplanes to fly on hydrogen to burn it. But converting the BTUs heat, whether it's in gasoline or hydrogen, in your car is not that efficient. It's only about 20 to 30% efficiency. And so if you're going to burn hydrogen where you only get that low efficiency going from heat to motion of your car, I think it's awfully difficult. I don't tell you to really burn it into combustion. But if you go hydrogen to fuel cells, then you get an efficiency increase. That is, if you let hydrogen go through a fuel cell, produce electricity, and then have electric motors in your car instead of internal combustion engine, or airplanes the same way, it looks somewhat better. Now you probably doubled or not doubled your efficiency, if you will, if you go to fuel. The problem, though, is Honda claims, I think unofficially probably, that each one of their cars they have in the US would cost about $200,000 to drive a car like that. It is a hydrogen fuel cell electric drive. By producing the hydrogen is an issue. Any primary energy source going from a primary energy source like solar, wind, to electricity, to disassociation, to electrolysis, sure looks difficult to me. Now, maybe there'll be some inventions, and you do read about some things that are big improvements in the dissociation of water and hydrogen and oxygen. But barring these inventions, it sure looks awfully hard for me to see how the numbers are going to work going from electricity with a primary source and then hydrogen. But nuclear might be a candidate. If you could go nuclear heat to hydrogen directly, not through electricity, much more efficient. The catch is you do need awfully high temperatures to disassociate water into oxygen and hydrogen. If you look at Chernobyl, for example, and Fukushima, those big explosions Chernobyl started with a steam explosion, but then the big one after that was hydrogen. Temperatures were so high that the water in the area dissociated in hydrogen oxide and recombined into a huge explosion. Fukushima was the same way. The big explosion was a hydrogen. Okay, other parts of the energy transition that play to electric vehicles. You know, we hear a lot about electric vehicles. They're going now. EVs are aggressively used, particularly in China, the US and Europe. China, the most of all, we're doing electric vehicles. Batteries for the electric have had great improvements in their energy density and in reduced manufacturing costs. I used to joke a decade and a half ago or so that you can't run your car on flashlight batteries. Well, you can run your car on flashlight batteries. Runs very well. Been huge improvements now. I don't know if you've ever looked at the battery in your computer. I had to replace my computer battery recently, and I was surprised. It's the thickness of a couple of cardboard sheets, yet it powers my computer for hours. And so lithium-ion batteries have really improved. Minerals is a problem. You're beginning to hear a little bit about that now. There's not enough of these critical minerals in the world to do and make all the batteries we want. You hear about mineral supply problems and the EV costs. Companies have raised their electric vehicle costs substantially. It was a couple of months ago, they all announced raises, big raises in their electric because of the mineral. I think that the world may well be about at capacity for manufacturing electric vehicles. There'll be about 10 million this year, close to 10 million cars and light trucks, electric cars and light trucks manufactured worldwide. China being the biggest, US second. And I think the world may be about a capacity. That's all we can make until we get some more minerals. Maybe we can get up to 12 or 14 million a year. So you're going to continually hear about people. Well, I've been waiting 6 months for my electric car. I ordered my electric pickup a year ago and it still isn't here. The demand is going to far exceed, I think, the ability to manufacture because we just aren't enough minerals here. And there will not be agreement. There will not be agreement on opening new mines, produce more minerals, which take half to a decade anyway. But there's going to be, there will definitely not be unanimous agreement on where to open these mines and what kind of restrictions to put on the mines. The Vietnamese announced something, but I haven't seen any more. It was announced about 2-3 months ago, I saw it. But they announced, the Vietnamese, that they were going to sell the cars, electric cars, but lease the batteries. And so you could lease whatever size battery you wanted. If you wanted to take long trips, you want a 300-mile range, you'd lease a big battery. If you're going to drive back and forth to work, sure, you can lease a small battery. That, to me, sounds awfully good because it would use less batteries, so you could make more electric cars with the same minerals. It drastically cut the price. But I haven't heard anything, so maybe it's not practical to change batteries like that. I don't really know. But it sounded like a good idea when I heard it. But I've heard nothing since then. On the other hand, fleet electric vehicles, I think Amazon announced some time ago they're going to buy 100,000 electric vans. To me, that makes a lot of sense. Really a lot of sense. They don't need big batteries. They have to charge them twice a day. It's okay. Once every day. They can charge them in their own area. You don't need, $76 billion network of charging stations. It's going to lose a lot of money for years on freeways that the U.S. is proceeding with now. I think these fleet vans make a lot of sense, in my opinion. In fact, if I look at my car, I have a big sedan, gasoline, it's a big car. Round trip to Park City, I get right around 30 miles per gallon, even with the air conditioner running in the summer. Driving freeway speed, about 30 miles per gallon. That's not bad. My wife's car is a hybrid. We've had electric cars since 2007. And she gets a little more than that round trip to Park City, maybe 35. But when I drive my big sedan back and forth to work, I get half the mileage. I'm down to 15, 16 miles a gallon, 17 miles a gallon, where my wife's car, she still gets 30. Hey, we're looking at the wrong thing. If you want to really reduce emissions, go after the people that drive around the city that get these low mileage. These big cars, their engines are really pretty efficient on the freeways. Natural gas. I couldn't talk about energy transition without talking about natural gas. Natural gas is really a biggie. Natural gas right now is serving as the fill-in, the storage, you could call it, for solar and wind. If there wasn't for natural gas, you would not be able to hook up the solar and wind that we are now to the grid. The more solar, wind, the more natural gas you're going to need. There's no indication that the U.S. energy production for natural gas will be decreasing. So natural gas is a key player in the energy transition. It's so widely embraced, as I mentioned before, that the world now is demanding much more than the supply. Natural gas turbines are the storage. Number three, natural gas availability and price have a huge impact on Europe and on the U.S. We hear a lot about gasoline price, which is down now, although it's going back up the last 6 days. It's been going up a little each day. But natural gas, I think, will have a far bigger impact on our economy than gasoline. 40% of our electricity from natural gas, and natural gas prices like tripled. Used to be $2, $7 today. $1.50 to $2, $1.50 to $2.50. So right at 7, it has been over $9. I think natural gas will have a big impact this winter on home heating and electric bills. You see, Europe has labeled natural gas as sustainable fuels. Now, not without some discontent from environmental groups. They decided that staying warm in the winter, not starving to death, was more important than the climate. I don't know if it is or not, but that's what they decided. Europe. Natural gas replacing coal has certainly slowed CO2 emissions worldwide, and it has helped the U.S. actually reduce its. Our emissions are below the Kyoto numbers. I don't know if you do that or not. Remember the Kyoto numbers in sentence there? We never did agree to them. Our emissions are actually below those numbers today because of natural gas. Don't forget natural gas came from fracking. You don't like fracking, if you don't like natural gas, where are you going to get your electricity? What about Europe? U.S. is the largest natural gas producer. Isn't that something? And we're the largest exporter. We're the largest producer of natural gas in the world, the largest, bigger than Qatar, bigger than Australia. That could change though. Nuclear energy. I was a strong advocate, have been a strong advocate, I still am, of nuclear. But I realized a few weeks ago I didn't know much about it. So I decided I was trying to learn about nuclear, understand it. Well, nuclear energy is not new. It's been around 60-some years, almost 65 years or something. And it provides about 2% of world energy. Some world energy. But it's about 10% of world electricity. It's about 20% of our electricity in the U.S. So nuclear does contribute some. Some have suggested maybe nuclear could, in a decade or two, provide 10 to 15% of world energy. It'd have to go from 2% to 10 or 15% in a decade. Probably not. Even if you really embrace nuclear strongly, that'd be an awfully big jump in a decade and a half or 2 decades. Incorrect perceptions exist by almost everyone. Advocates like me didn't know anything about it. I didn't understand the complexity. Dissuaders who are against it don't understand the radiation concerns, the different reactor designs and fuel designs that can be used for safety. And so, but virtually everyone has misconceptions about nuclear, and everyone has an opinion. Different reactor designs, I don't call them new because they've been developed and tested, but the different reactor designs and fuels. Reactors and fuels go together. Right now, maybe you all know this. Tim McCarter is here. I think he knows more about uranium. Uranium ore comes as U-238. It's not radioactive or not very radioactive, but then it has a little bit of 235 in it. So then you enrich the 238 to bring it up to about 5-6% of 235, which is used in our reactors today. That's still awfully low. France goes up to, I think it's, somebody knows more than I. France, I think, goes up to 15% or so. But the problem is, higher enriched uranium, higher enriched U-238 produces plutonium as it burns, if you will, as it as it decays. And plutonium then is what we would use for nuclear weapons. So that's an issue there with the higher. But if you go to a different reactor, you buy different fuels. That's a new invention. And then along with that, smaller reactors, these huge mammoth reactors, like the one under construction in Georgia right now. They're probably not going to go. If you look at number 6 there, number 6 is that limitation on nuclear, is cost. When you talk to utilities, hey, look, Phil Gould right here, he knows all about these, it's cost. They're just a lot more expensive. These big reactors, all the way we build them now, it's just not cost competitive. And so that's a big driver, even though people have strong opinions, that's really a driver. So hydrogen, I saw because 2% of the world is now. I haven't fact checked that. I couldn't find it. I usually have to find at least 2 sources say they give me the same number about thing numbers and checking, but I couldn't fact check the 2%. If that's true, that the current 90 million tons of hydrogen produced annually consumes 2% of the world's energy, if that's true, it tells you several things. It tells you that producing hydrogen is pretty tough. It's a lot of energy, if that's true. And maybe nuclear could replace that. Maybe that a nuclear could really replace that. That's a lot, 2%. So I don't know, but I have a fact, but if that is true, it really tells us a couple of things. Carbon capture, couldn't talk about energy transition without talking about it. You hear a lot about carbon capture. Well, right now, today, the world collects about 40 million tons of carbon dioxide. It's quite a bit, but it's not much of that 36 billion tons, but it's a lot, I think. 40 million tons of carbon dioxide gas is quite a bit. About 100 projects around the world. Now, almost all of that CO2 that's captured today is not exactly sequestered. Now, Brian McPherson is one of the experts, and I don't see him here today, but he's an expert here at the University of Utah on the carbon capture and sequestration. But almost all of it's used for enhanced oil recovery. And that's good. You capture some carbon dioxide, you put it in an oil well, you get back more oil, so that's good. But it's not exactly sequestering, if you will, because most of that carbon dioxide comes back out with the oil. Now, what Brian will say is that, well, yeah, but it's about 10% stays in the oil, 90% comes back. Well, you take that 90%, you put it in the next well, and then it loses 10%, keep going, and finally you have. And that's true, but if you run out of wells, then you have to admit that that's not sequestering. It's okay, it's good for the nation, but about 40 million tons, the DOE, I think, has a projection. If I recall, this projection is likely to get up to about 100 million tons in the U.S. alone, which will be a lot, awfully lot, in like, I think by 30 or 35, probably 35, they'd like to be up to 100 million tons in the U.S. That's a pretty aggressive goal. You look at this direct capture now. We just put a machine out there somewhere, anywhere, in your backyard, if you like, and it starts sucking the carbon dioxide out of the air. Sounds like a good idea. Until you run the numbers and see how much energy does it take, which is pollution. You have to get the energy from some other source. How much energy does it take to run that machine to suck out a little bit of carbon dioxide out of it? I don't know if it works or not. I've never seen a complete cycle analysis, but there is quite an effort now because quite frankly, there's a market here up here. So there's a market here. So there's a market there. And of course, on top of it, the government's going to pay for the carbon dioxide capture. All you do is capture it, you get paid by the government, whether you're using way more energy or not. This could be worse than converting coin to transport fuel. I don't really know. Investment groups are noting that subsurface storage, and what do you do if you start capturing 100 million tons a year? What do you do with it? Subsurface storage is, I quote them directly, not clear, one group said not yet proven. And so I think that the capture has kind of gotten ahead of what to do with it after we capture it. So, but Brian McPherson, he's working hard on this subsurface storage. One of the big things is the liability associated with leakage. Methane, natural gas, if you leak methane, it just goes up, lighter than air. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air. Yeah. Sets in valleys and low spots, and you could have tremendous problems. Had the Aliso Canyon blowout in 2017, which was a natural gas storage well blowout, San Fernando Valley, California. If that had been CO2, they would have had to evacuate probably the entire San Fernando Valley, millions of people. So the liability on the leakage for any onshore storage, this has to be a pretty big problem. I know Brian, I know Rob Simmons here is working on that, has some ideas on how we might do that, but somebody's going to have to take the liability if you start storing it underground. Offshore probably is okay. If you look at, Norway, you hear about in the North Sea, they're storing a lot of gas, and that is actually stored there. It's not used for CO2, it's not used for that. It's actually stored, but it's offshore. If you have a leak offshore, carbon dioxide just bubbles up through the ocean water. It's probably absorbed. The difference. That's different than having a storage in a populated area. Particular bothersome area is at number 6, in that why haven't we been able to make large point sources work? I mean, if you can't make them work, why would you go to direct air capture? For example, right here in Utah, we have 2 large point sources. One is the Huntington coal plant. Good plant, it's a mine mouth plant, it's called. Coal comes right out of the mine, right into the burn of Huntington. Huntington produces about 6 million tons a year carbon dioxide. Not a secret. About 6 million tons. Well, it's right there. Why wouldn't you go after that? It's right there coming out of 2 smokestacks. I think Huntington has 2 smokestacks. It's coming out of 2 smokestacks. If you can't make that work, why would you go to direct air capture? And then we have a second one, Utah, the Delta plant. I don't know how much it's produced. Now, all the electricity in Delta plant goes to Los Angeles. It's run by Los Angeles Water and Power. It's 2 gigawatts, twice as big as Huntington. So they produce, if they're running full blast, they produce 12 million pounds, 12 million tons, 12 million tons a year. That's a lot. That's a lot of Utah's total carbon dioxide. Think how many cars would have to switch to electric to replace the 18 million tons of carbon dioxide that these 2 plants put in when they're both running full blast. Does anybody look at these numbers? Okay, I'm out of time almost, so let me just briefly cover things. I won't go in detail because these could be subjects of their own. One is for the energy transition, storing underground is a very big thing. We already store a lot underground, about. We store a lot of natural gas, about 4 trillion standard cubic feet of natural gas every year underground. We put it in the ground and bring it out. Right here in Utah, we have one of the best underground storage facilities in the world, the Clay Basin. Very good storage. But storing natural gas is one. Those are all arranged in alphabetical order. They're not by priorities. We've talked about storing nuclear waste underground already. We're looking now at storing carbon dioxide. So underground storage has to play a much bigger role. Hydrogen, if we're going to make a lot of hydrogen, it'll have to be stored probably underground. So we're going to have to store hydrogen underground. So that's a big issue to use underground storage. It's going to be required to beef up our underground use as we move forward with the energy transition. Critical minerals, I just mentioned this loosely, but this has become a big. It's particularly difficult because these critical minerals that we have, lithium, cobalt, nickel, as well as metals like steel, copper, and aluminum, but critical minerals tend to be in low-grade deposits. They're not like iron ore. They're not like even copper, which is fairly low grade. That means the cost to extract them in terms of energy and emissions is going to be great. Doesn't anybody look at this? I mean, it's going to have huge costs to mine, hard rock mines. Then you have to mill the right, probably to talcum powder side. It takes huge amounts of energy to grind up that rock. Then you have to eventually heat it to melting point to recover these critical minerals. So recovering more is going to take a lot of energy and a lot of costs, and there won't be agreement as to where we're going to do this. And yet we don't have enough of these critical minerals. It's nonsense. Just look at the numbers. How many EVs can we build until we're out here? Now we eventually will have to recycle, and I think we will. I think recycling will come. We'll start recycling batteries. I saw that, I didn't realize how much we are recycling. This company in Nevada, they said they're recycling about 200,000 tons a year. That's a lot of cell phone batteries. But most of that is coming from the battery manufacturers themselves, scrap from battery manufacturers. Because, but that's a lot, but nonetheless, recycling will have to happen. But recycling is 5 to 10 years away. I think we will recycle. We have to first invent techniques to do it, then test them, scale them up, commercialize them. It'll be 5 to 10 years. Recycling is 30 every year. New subsidies on battery grid storage that the federal government just put in place. That'll be a real competition between how many as the lithium-ion batteries go into grid storage versus into electric vehicles. Real competition. So anyway, critical minerals are really on the table. You probably aren't aware of this, but Kim McCarter knows all about this. You know, we're buying virtually all of our tungsten metal from Russia. Do you know all of our enriched uranium for our reactors? We have how many, is it 40 years? I've forgotten how many. All of that's coming from Russia. What about that? Okay, the last one. You couldn't talk about the energy transition without talking about this. The whole idea is to try and reduce these. That's what it's about. That's what we want to do, is reduce these somewhat. Coal, oil, and natural gas supply today, probably something over 80. I see between 80 and 84% of the numbers being quoted of the world's energy being provided by coal, oil, and natural gas today. 2 decades ago, 3 decades, let me say 4 or 5 decades. 4 or 5, it was probably 86%. And it's come down from 86% or so to maybe as low as 80, but 80 to 84 in 5 decades. Now, if you think you're going to get that down to 0 in a couple of decades, you just can't be looking at the numbers. And so coal, oil, and gas produces over 80% of the world's energy. You saw how much we use, 1 million barrels, 24 million tons of coal. Credible projections are all projecting that the demand for oil will stay about 100 million, goes up another 1 million barrels a year or so for a while. It's getting near peak demand, oil is. And that fossil fuels by 2050 will still be maybe 70%. Now, let me clarify that. You can see a lot of numbers in reports that say, if you do this, this is what the emissions will be. And they're true. But they are not saying, they are not predicting the world is going to do these things. So all credible projections, with IEA, United Nations, they're all projecting that still in 2050 we're going to be using. Now don't forget, world energy consumption is growing 2 to 3% a year, about 2%, but some say it's likely to increase to about 3% a year. By 2050, the world will be using a lot more energy. And so if you can hold that to 70%, that's a major success, I think, to do that. Energy security, well, we know about that. Can you imagine that because of fracking, the US actually became energy independent, I think, in August of, I forgot, was it maybe 17 or 18? John probably knows. With the United States became energy. Can you imagine it? Back 3 decades ago, even 3, 4 decades ago, nobody dreamed that the US could really become energy independent. We were. Now it's gone the other way again. And so we're not, we're importing a lot of oil. But look at number 5, and I highlighted that in red because I say even though fossil fuels will persist, emissions, we can lower our emissions, we really can. But you won't help yourself by unrealistic projections and being unrealistic about things that can really happen. We really can lower our projections. I think we can lower them a lot. We have already, and I think we can lower more. Finally, the last thing is just observations regarding the energy transition have emerged. These are things that have emerged, I argue. The importance of energy costs, energy security, and how the energy transition can affect these has really emerged, particularly as Russia invaded Ukraine. They really brought that to the forefront, although Europe was already feeling the pain, and we were too. Rolling blackouts, particularly in some land, the Texas situation there did in February of 20, and more realistic timelines for inventions actually are being accepted. I mean, people kind of are, even the media is beginning to pick on nonsensical things. And so I see a more realistic timeline for inventions. These so-called hockey stick projections. Where it's going to go and it's just going to take off like a hockey stick, they're called, because they look like a hockey stick. Projections are just nonsense. It just isn't going to happen like that. And so we need to be more realistic. We're seeing more of a separation in U.S. emissions from the world. We can lower our emissions, and we are. But it's not clear what it's going to do to the world. I mean, China, I saw the paper just recently, maybe you did too. China has something like 200 and some coal-fired power plants, about the size of Gatsby plant here. Downtown Gatsby must be about 200 and some megawatts, 225 megawatts, I think. They have 200 and some coal-fired plants, either under construction or funded. That's not planned, that's under construction or financed already. They're bringing those on, so a couple of weeks right now, coal-fired. So you say, hey, are we going to provide enough solar and wind? We're going to cut the world emissions? I don't think it's a problem. Maybe we can be a role model, though. And more importantly, maybe we can invent things that could be deployed to the world. I think that's what we should be doing. I think trying to commercialize things that aren't even invented yet is wasting money. We should be doing more research to try and invent things that could be commercialized worldwide. Last thing, this is a report just came out. I just saw it like 2 weeks ago or something like that. It just came out from the National Renewable Energy Lab in Colorado. Good group. And it's interesting, it's really worth reading, but they talk about DOE's been promoting now. They talk about a report on net zero emissions. First of all, be sure you try to understand if you're going through it, whether they're talking about the US or the world. That's not always clear. And sometimes we talk about US electricity and US, somebody says, oh, well, nuclear provides 20% of the energy. Wait, not 20% of the world energy, it's only 2% of our electricity. It's not clear what's electricity or total energy. Our US electricity is far from our total energy US consumed. So be careful as you read it. They haven't done a complete cycle. No one has come on and really looked at a complete cycle. There's been some work, a little bit of work on complete cycle for emissions. People have looked at corn to transport fuel over and over. The University of Toronto report looked at EVs versus internal combustion engines and emissions. That came out a couple of years ago. But there hasn't been a complete cycle, economics, technology, unintended consequences, and emissions. What is meant by net zero? I don't know. Maybe you know. I mean, it probably means different things to different people. And so trying to understand that, what it really means and what are the implications for climate warming. They talk a lot about how to do something, which is good, not that they're projecting it will happen. So the NREL report talks much more about how to reach our projections, not that it will happen. They have 4 scenarios. They all require, and they admit it, inventions yet to be made. Well, now when you're projecting things for inventions that haven't yet been made, that's very difficult. And there is no cost estimate of what the costs will be for these scenarios, nor what the price of energy will be if we did carry it out. But it's a good report. It's really worth reading. It's a good report. I recommend it. Okay, my closing slide. If I leave one message, it would be that the world really needs this complete cycle. And really look at the complete cycle. There's an economics technology coupling, because they're very much coupled. There's of course emissions. We want to lower emissions. That's the whole idea. There's unintended consequences, all kind of unintended consequences. And so I sent a letter to the 4 deans here at the University of Utah. They're looking at trying to do something, suggesting that maybe the University of Utah could become a world leader. But this won't necessarily be a popular thing. I mean, people take it up and say, hey, look, you didn't do this and do that. Look at this. My speech isn't going to be approved by everyone, if you will. Because when you start talking the facts, energy is really complex, complicated, and there is no silver bullet. I wish there were, but there's just not. And so anyway, with that, I close.
Right.
Are there any questions?
A comment about battery storage. In California, they're going to require all the cars to be electric in the next, what is it, 20 years, 10 or 20 years. And that brings up
The new car sales.
yes, that's right. But it brings up the idea of distributed batteries. You know, each car has its own battery. Tesla wants you to use solar cells to charge your batteries. So you can imagine all of this. That sounds like a large amount of storage distributed over all the cars in California and eventually the world. Of course, that doesn't get around the problem that you mentioned about the ability of the raw materials, namely lithium. So that, I mean, there's a lot of work being going on right now for non-lithium batteries, and there's some promising results. And that's a place that Utah could make a difference, I think. I mean, there's some work going on right now. I think Neil has some work going on in that area, but a new kind of battery that doesn't use lithium or some other limited material.
So that falls in this category that I suggested that, you know, if the US can invent things that could be deployed then worldwide, we could have a very big impact. And there's a lot of work on batteries, but I'm not aware of anything that looks like you could really scale it up yet. But we should keep going. I mean, really keep working at it. We're here in Utah and other places too. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wind and solar require batteries. Okay, the girl.
Hey, you were talking about like importing more fuel used to be energy independent, but I also believe that we export a lot of our natural gas and oil. If we weren't exporting that, would that put us back to being energy neutral, or does that become
No, but your point is really a good one about natural gas. We don't export much oil. A little bit. One of the reasons oil gets changed back and forth, our refineries are developed to refine heavy oil. That's what we have initially. Then all the shale oil came online. It's like crude, and so our refineries weren't good at refining it. So we would actually sell some here and buy back some. So we're not exporting those, we're actually importing our gas. But natural gas is a different story. I don't know if you all followed, but when the Freeport McMoran gas plant, the gas liquefying plant, caught on fire a couple of months ago, that cut down a large share of the U.S. exports because it's not back up yet. And when it did, then it pushed more of our natural gas to U.S. The prices dropped. And so I mean, that's very revealing. Now, of course, the administration, we all are trying to help Ukraine and Europe, trying to help Europe. And so that's a delicate one. Do we keep exporting? But in the case of natural gas, it clearly is raising our local price because we're exporting. Yeah, I don't have an answer to that, but that's a fact. When the Freeport McMoran plant, when it went down, I mean, we started right away. All that gas got pushed into our market, and so the price started going down. Good point. The other thing I don't know if you're talking about, is it easier to transport electricity or natural gas? I don't know. You know, if you're going to transfer a pipeline gas, it's called, we don't have to liquefy methane. You want to transport 600, 800 miles. I think it might be not much more expensive than using electricity. They both lose energy. That's worth looking at for someone. I thought the other day, I said, hey, because it really affects Russia. Russia's got big markets where they could potentially deliver pipeline gas, which would be good for the world if you liquefy to Europe and to China. And they need 600,000-800,000 miles. It may not be any more expensive than we do in electricity. You know how much that costs. It's not free. But never mind the line. I don't know which are more expensive, electric lines or underground gas pipes. I don't really know. Another question?
Yeah. Bruce Hamilton asked,
Bruce Hamilton's from NSF.
well, he says fantastic presentation, but given the obstacles to rapid energy transition, it seems that things will be getting hotter with affiliated effects such as drought, storms, and so forth. What do you see as the implications for adaptation?
Quit whining. Gonna happen. You won't help yourself by whining about it. Already here in the US, we've got real problems with forest fires and flooding, costing billions, hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So the world's really faced with the warming climate. And Bruce asking a good question. I don't know what to do, but you know, it is a fact. I usually look at this. Far more people die of cold than of heat. Do you know that? 200,000 or something reportedly die each year annually worldwide. I don't know where the number comes from, but from cold and the heat is like 10 or 20,000. But they say that's changing. And so we may find that suddenly we have 200,000 dying from heat and 10,000 from cold. I don't really know. But I can say that we ought to start adapting because it's your high tides, not because of ocean rising, but high tides, roadways, hurricanes might become more violent. Yeah, good point. I don't have any answer to that one either. I'll be gone, but you guys will be around. Any more questions? Thanks, John.
No, thank you.
I just had a comment. First of all, excellent presentation, sir. I draw 4 conclusions from your presentation. The first one you just said, and that is that climate change during the lifetime of anyone in this room is absolutely unavoidable.
The dies pass.
There is nothing that anyone in this generation can do to that. Second, the holy grail of the utility industry is increasingly storage, and we'll have to have many different ways to do that. The third is that there have to be many sources. There's not going to be a black and white transition, and nothing's going to happen here. And the fourth is, you know, in this room, we talk a lot about engineering solutions and technology inevitabilities. We need to broaden the discussion to include politics and the financial side in this way. Moving on to comment about the EVs and the batteries distributed, we are starting to see utilities come out with demand reduction strategies where if you surrender your battery at their time of choosing, you get a reduced rate. I think those are going to proliferate. We'll find economic solutions where the technology just is there. But excellent presentation.
Yeah, one thing I failed to mention, but you bring it up in that economics really works. Whether you're a dictatorship, a democracy, socialist country, economics really holds. And eventually it touches you. There's just so much governments can do in the way of subsidizing the stick or the carrot, but economics really work. That's why I said our nuclear, they're too expensive. The utility industry would install more nuclear if they were cheap. Yeah, good point. I also didn't mention this one on here, there, that bottom ribbon. That now we're very entrepreneurial here at the University of Utah. There's going to be a lot of business opportunity. I mean, and you don't have to necessarily, you won't be reducing world emissions a lot, but your business has to be profitable. That's the key.